joining us today, um, and for being here for this conversation. This is part of a larger series that we call the Veterans Lived Experience series. It's a joint effort from George Mason's Military Veteran and Family Initiative and the Veterans Health and Wellness Foundation. Just to give you a quick snippet on those and how we factor into this before we get going. George Mason is the largest public research university in Virginia, and we've got a very sizable military connected population. Upwards of about 10% of our student body identifies as service member, veteran, or family member, and likely there are more who are not self-identifying. We're also in the middle of the DC metro area, and so we have a fair number of folks that in the surrounding region as well. So the Military Veteran Family Initiative is Mason's effort to give back to the service members, veterans, and the family members, who have given so much to the nation through our activity as a research university, with terms of our education, our research, our training, and direct services, including programming like this one. One of the key parts of our initiative is partnerships with community organizations. And our partnership with Veterans Health and Wellness Foundation is one of our biggest sort of strengths. We're fortunate to have the president and chair of the Veterans Health and Wellness Foundation, Dr. Evelyn Lewis, here with us today. And I just want to thank her for joining us and give her the virtual floor for a moment to tell you a little bit about that organization before we get moving.
Thank you, Keith, and welcome to everyone who's joined us today, as well as to our guests. Just a little bit about the foundation, which I more often than not will read simply because I think it really sums up who we are and what we do very well. We're a foundation established by military veterans with expertise in the area of health, wellness, and healthcare delivery, and where that intersects with what we call social determinants of health and military culture. The Veteran Foundation itself exists for the express purpose of addressing systemic inequities regarding access to and excellence in care provided by the Veterans Administration and other civilian healthcare facilities to veterans and their families. And so we do that, we operationalize that through education, through various training modalities, meetings, et cetera. And this format here, Veterans Lived Experiences, is one of those where we capture the experience from those veterans themselves, such that healthcare professionals, as well as people in the community and family members and other veterans who may have had those same experiences, can touch base and become connected, and therefore have that best interact and best help veterans with those types of experiences. So thank you, Keith, and again, welcome to everyone.
Sure. Well, yeah, I want to, in addition to thanking all of you for joining us, I want to especially thank our guests, and we're going to get moving with that. Today's topic is a difficult one, but a really important one, and one of unfortunate increasing prevalence, or at least increasing awareness, I suppose, of the prevalence, and that's military sexual trauma. There have been a number of reports, lately that have been detailing the numbers, which are dramatic, and these, they do sort of spread across women and men, but certainly are disproportionately present in women veterans, women service members and veterans. We're really fortunate to have a number of guests with us today to talk about their work and their experiences. Patty Gerhauser is a post 9/11 veteran of the U.S. Navy. She's a wife, mom of two, and community organizer and veteran advocate. She's currently serving as the executive director for the Veteran Service Organization, or VSO, RISE, rank and file. We'll provide a link to that for you all. RISE is a nonprofit that's dedicated basically to building supportive communities that work together to advance values of representation, inclusion, solidarity, and equity in service of minority veteran populations. And with her, we also have Ariana Hunter, who is also a veteran of the U.S. Army, not Navy. She's a mom of three, an author and veteran advocate, and in addition to serving as the director of the Office of Veteran Services at the University of Pittsburgh, she also serves as the Chief Operations Officer for RISE Rank and File. And if I have it right, also is pursuing her PhD in community engagement. And so thank you for carving out some time for us here. And Michael Levy is a clinical psychologist at the Baltimore VA Medical Center, whose focus is working with diverse groups of veterans who have experienced a wide variety of trauma, child abuse, intimate partner violence, combat race-based trauma, but also military sexual trauma. Dr. Levy focused specifically on intersectionality, or the role of sort of intersecting identities, and the role that majority culture and systems play in perpetuating oppression of marginalized groups. So we really appreciate Dr. Levy taking the time as well. Let me just check and see, because I can't quite monitor the entire group, if we have Kelly Ferry with us, who is going to be our final panelist.
She's trying to get on right now.
Oh, okay, there you go. All right, well, hopefully we will be able to.
She's joining right now.
Look at that. All right. Okay. Well, that is unbelievable timing. Literally, as I say, is Kelly Ferry here? Boom, there she is. Kelly, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here. I was just getting through the introductions and had arrived at you, so your timing is impeccable. So Kelly Ferry is a United States Army, a U.S. Army combat veteran, and also a military sexual trauma survivor during her military service. She deployed to Egypt in 2001 and to Iraq in 2003. And in 2018, she led the creation of the Female Veterans and Children's Program at Veterans Place in Pittsburgh. She's assisting high-risk and homeless veterans with children's. She's a fierce advocate for homeless and high-risk veterans that suffer from trauma, addiction, and other mental health issues, and specializes in working with justice-involved veterans, helping them sort of navigate through the criminal justice system. So we're really, really pleased to have all of you joining us, and I have been talking for far too long already. So I would love to turn it over to Patty, Ariana, and Kelly to just open up some discussion in terms of sharing some of your experiences, thoughts in your own lives and in working with veterans who are in the space.
Yeah, thanks, Keith. It is interesting. I'll kind of just kick us off. So thank you for the wonderful introduction and for having us here today. It's quite an honor to be on these panels as we talk about military sexual trauma, how it's impacted veterans. And for me, it actually has impacted my own personal life. And I think that's why it's so incredibly important for me to be here today and have this opportunity and this platform to talk about it. I really want to hear Kelly's story today too, because I know Kelly, I've heard her story before too. And when she tells it, I feel like it's my story too, right? I feel like there's so many things that we as survivors have experienced that we don't talk about for a very long time, and it takes us down different paths. And so for me, I joined the Army 2 months after 9/11 happened, and we're coming up on the 20th anniversary of me joining, and it kind of blows my mind that I'm that old. But I joined because I felt like my country needed me. I was like, I'm 18 years old. I can join the Army. I'm going to do this. I was the first person in my family to serve in the military. And, why I picked the Army, I don't know. Like, they had the best sales guy, right? The best recruiter. And I knew I'd go to war. I knew that I was going to go support my country in a time when it was needed and necessary. And, you're met with, believe it or not, a ton of sexual harassment and discrimination the moment that you arrive, and you don't really even recognize it for what it is because you're a young person and still just navigating life and trying to figure out where you fit in. And in 2003, I was some of the first boots on the ground when we invaded Iraq. I got there, I actually found the paper the other day, February 8th, 2003. So my anniversary of being in country was yesterday. And I wasn't there a couple of weeks before I was raped by NCO in my chain of command. And being at war, unsure of what tomorrow was going to bring, unsure of my own personal safety, I said nothing. I didn't report. I didn't talk to a single soul about it. I had to serve with him and continue to serve with him for the rest of the time that I was in country, and never knew what was going to happen to me after that. So constantly on guard, constantly afraid. And all I knew to do was just push it away, to not think about it, to not focus on it, to just try to do my job and move forward. I came home, I suffered from panic attacks, anxiety attacks, things that I had never experienced before in my life. And, I would try to attribute it to something else. I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to tell anyone. And so, unfortunately, I ended up leaving my time in the military early. I did not serve my full 4 years. I served just over 3, and got out. I was fortunate to get out honorably. And it was a really big struggle after that. So for me, instead of turning to things like drugs and alcohol, I turned to staying so busy I didn't have time to think. I just had kids, I just went to school, I worked full time, I did all the things that you could possibly add into your schedule. And it wasn't until a year and a half ago that a couple of failed marriages later and struggling with my own mental health, did I say, okay, it's time for me to go get some help. And I went to one of our local vet centers and started to receive counseling for my military sexual trauma. And through that course of this last year and a half, I'm now in my late 30s, I am finding my voice. I am sharing my story that I've never shared before. I am helping others to share their story, because for me, that's therapeutic, in helping others recognize that there's power in sharing your story, not only for yourself, but for other people. And so that's why Patty and I really took this opportunity to found Me Too MST, which is a storytelling platform where survivors can share anonymously. They can share through any kind of medium that's important to them. So through art, through poetry, through spoken word, through writing, because all of those avenues are so therapeutic for people in their own way. And I just thought for myself, had I had an opportunity to share in a way that was anonymous before a year and a half ago, maybe I could have started down this journey of recovery a lot sooner. So that's my own personal story and how we got here. But I'd love for you guys to hear from Kelly, because I feel like Kelly and I, though our stories are similar, they're kind of the opposite of the spectrum. So I think it's important to recognize that difference in the spectrum for sure.
Is that my cue? Okay, hi. Hi, everybody. My name is Kelly. I'm so sorry that I was late. I'm in a country setting now with the Wi-Fi is not Pittsburgh Wi-Fi. So thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And I hope the setting is okay. I'm in my car. I ran out of the grocery store.
Kelly, I think you hit the mute button.
Unmute. Okay, can you hear me? Okay, so sorry. This is thank you so much for inviting me to this. This is so important for me to be involved in things like this. Number one, to hear other women and men that go through the same similar stories, and I can identify, because a lot of times it circles in my head that, like, it was my fault still to this day, you know what I mean? And so my story started, I joined the military back in 2001, a few months before 9/11 happened. I was like, oh, I'll just join the military, go to school, what could happen? And I ended up on the ground in Egypt in 9/22, just a few days after 9/11 happened. And I was thrust into a very male-dominated atmosphere, and I was okay with that. I feel like I'm a strong woman. I'm okay in that kind of surrounding. The ratio is about 12-1, where I'm in ordnance, ammunitions. So being in that atmosphere, it was difficult, but I felt like I held my position well. So nothing started happening until I redeployed. I came back home and I redeployed to Kuwait before the war. The war started in 2003. I hit Kuwait on the ground. I hit dirt January 2003. I had a new commander and a new sergeant major commanding our headquarters, our battalion. And you know, I when I think about them, I now see all like the red flags and the things that I should have saw and the things that I should have been aware of. But I bought into the military hook, line, and sinker. I was a city kid without a lot of opportunities. I didn't know what else to do with myself, and like I wanted to be something. I wanted to be a part of something, and like I'm a patriot to my core, you know. And like I said, I bought into the military, all the glitz and glamour that it was going to be, and I came to realize very quickly, not everybody that wears a uniform is a hero. And you know, and I know it's a haven for heroes, and it's also a haven for predators. And I felt it. I knew what was going on almost immediately. My sergeant major and my colonel, basically, it was like a game, I guess, to them, tag team. Just really, just the sexual harassment and abuse alone wasn't just, like I said, it was like a game for them. And I was in another country during a war, and I was scared. And I wish I could explain how I felt, but it's hard for me to like admit that I was terrified, but I was. It's hard for me to admit that I felt helpless, but I was. And like it came to the point where they got me alone often, and it's just, I wish I would have done more, but I'm not sure there was more I could have done at that time. And like I said, I'm not a weak woman, but I was so scared, and to the point where like I kept thinking, every time they would make sure that I drove alone with them to the border, to the berm, over into Iraq, and I kept thinking, one of these times I'm not coming back. You know, I'm too vocal, and I was afraid that they were gonna think she's gonna say something, or like they were gonna kill me. Friendly fire is a real thing, and like I said, it was scary. And when I got out of the military early too, and I never told anybody what happened. The day that I signed out of the military, I went to the IG and I reported what happened. Every piece of evidence I had, I saved. Every fingerprint that I thought I had, every letter, my colonel was writing me crazy letters. Everything I could document, I did, because in this kind of environment, it's my word against two very powerful people. And I was so afraid like I would end up in like the brig in military prison or something. So I saved all that. And when I got back, I sent things home to my mother. I sent paperwork and anything, I sealed in an envelope, and I said, if anything happens to me, to take this to the police or to somewhere, you know what I mean? It wasn't an accident. And that's when I think about that stuff that I did now, that's insane. That I was, for 6 months, I thought like they're probably gonna kill me. I just, like I said, and I know it's common. This is common behavior, not just females, males, you know. To have somebody that has authority over your life doing things like that's the most helpless thing I've ever felt in my life. There's a chain of command. I was so afraid to tell the next person in line, because like, who do you trust? Who do they believe, a colonel or an E4? You know? And who cares if they believe me? You know what I mean? I just didn't know what to do. And when I got home and I signed out of the military, so I knew I was safe, I went and I reported it then. But I never spoke about it until then, because like I said, I didn't know what would happen to me. The burden of that situation, broke me completely, like as a person. I carried around like, was it my fault? What did I do? Could I do more? That stuff messed with my head so much that I turned to drugs. I turned to alcohol. And I wanted to pretend like it didn't happen. I wanted to pretend that I had some kind of part in it, because just thinking like it was being a victim, basically being a victim, was one of the hardest things for me to grasp in my life. Like I said, I'm not a weak woman. I'm not a victim, but I was. And it just I just couldn't get around it, and I became very hateful, self-loathing, and just hated men completely. And I wasn't like that before I joined the military. Like I just went on like a rampage of hating myself and others. My expectations of the military, while maybe unrealistic, were just destroyed. And like I said, I ended up on drugs. I walked away from my family. I walked away from my son. I walked away from everything. I ended up being homeless on heroin, and like for like almost a decade of my life. And that is not the woman that I am. That's not the female that I am. But like what had happened, just I couldn't wrap my brain around it. And when I told the IG, and I know some things happened, some people were brought to justice, 4 other women came forward. That tells me I know I did the right thing. I know I did the right thing, but still, in a way, it beats me up in my brain that I betrayed my country, that I betrayed, because you're brainwashed into the military. Basically, you're broken down and brought up a soldier, and it still messes with me today. And that's why when I hear Ariana's story, I realize I'm not alone in this. I didn't do the wrong thing, but it's still hard to grasp, and it's still hard to deal with. But those women came forward. My sergeant major, I believe, lost his pension, and my colonel was relieved of duty because of the evidence now. But thank God I had evidence. Was relieved of duty, and can go no higher in rank. That was back in 2004. So I know something happened. Still, I have some soldiers from that post that I talk to today that believe me, that love me, and some that hate me because they think I destroyed the battalion. And I had like, let me jump forward. So I ended up, like I said, a decade of my life destroyed because just the mental anguish, I guess, that I dealt with. And I finally talked to somebody at the VA, and this doctor helped me understand my part in this. Because I still blame myself. I still feel like, what did I do what signals did I give them to make them think that I was a target? What did I do wrong? What did I do wrong? And I have to keep telling myself, even today, I didn't do anything wrong. They're opportunists. They're predators. And I'm not the only one. I'm not an easy target. I just still think like maybe I played a part, but I know that I didn't today. And I know I wasn't their first victim. They were too comfortable doing it. And there's some peace in my mind knowing I may have saved someone's life or done something to stop them from doing it to somebody else. And like that within itself helps. But I have 5 years clean off of heroin. Surprisingly, I'm a productive human being today. But it took so much healing and so much I get time. And I don't believe I'll ever get over it, but I am getting through it, and I'm so happy that stuff like this is being talked about, because how many people are in the military? How many people are in the military? How many people is this happening to? And it's being acknowledged. It is being recognized, and I think that in some way it's gonna stop hopefully most of it. Now that people are knowing it's a real thing, it's like PTSD. It's recognized today. This is a real thing, and I don't know what else I could tell you. Like I said, I numb, and I had to see that doctor, and I had to get clean, and I had to heal. But I'm in a healthy relationship today that I never thought I would be in. You know, I have both my children. I live in South Carolina, but I'll pause from now. But if there's anything else I could say to push this forward or help, just let me know. Okay. Okay.
Thank you, Kelly. You're so very good at telling your story. You do such a great job of really, I think, capturing like the really important pieces of your journey. And I really appreciate you joining us. So my name's Patty Gerhauser. I'm the executive director of Rise Rank and File. I work with Ariana, and I'm a Navy veteran. I served for almost 4 years in the Navy. My story is not, does not involve physical assault as Kelly and Ariana's did. My story is more about just the culture of the military in general. The culture of sexual harassment, the culture of the cover-up culture of the military. When I first joined the military and got out of boot camp, I remember the first school I attended just being very surprised by the types of activities that people would engage in and the types of things that were prevalent within the culture. Everything from hotel parties that were just massive orgies, where I showed up at one not knowing what it was, and all of my coworkers are having sex with one another, to the constant use of alcohol. All of the schools and the commands that I served in, partying on a nightly basis was the norm. I remember the schools I attended, people would stay out until 3, 4 in the morning every night of the week drinking to get up at 6 and go to class. And they just pop some no-dos, wash it down with the Monster, and go on their way. It was very, very shocking to me, not only because I joined the military based on the military's values, right? I thought I was going to go do something great. I thought I was going to be a part of this really awesome family and change the world, right? I was very naive as a young person. So, I had all that going on. The job that I was in the Navy, less than 1% of the people in my role were women. I was very often the only woman in the room, the only woman in my work center, the only woman in my division. When I finally got to a ship, my final command, the ratio of men to women on the ship was probably 1 to 15. I didn't work with any women, so I only really saw women in the cafeteria when I went to eat and in berthing when I went to sleep. Wasn't with them very much. And I can tell you, being the only woman oftentimes in that environment, it's just insane. I can't tell you the number of different coping mechanisms I used throughout that time period. I had to learn very quickly to be way more assertive than I was. I was very quiet, very shy, was not assertive at all when I joined the military. The military hardened me a lot. I have a very good resting bitch face now. I mean, you had to walk around the ship with your eyes down, like a stone face. Like, you did not want to be the center of anyone's attention, because that meant you were being harassed by anyone and everyone, right? You didn't want to be a target, like Kelly said, and a lot of times that didn't even work, because when they saw you behaving that way, that would just make you a target even more. It just depended on the person. Specifically for me, my biggest source, I think, of what caused me anxiety and mental health issues in the military was, in particular, the chief I had when I was on my ship. He was my superior for around 2 years. He was in charge of my day-to-day life. He had a lot of control over where I was, who I worked with, what I was doing. He would write the watch bills. We went on deployment for almost 7 months, and he would always write the watch bills so that I stood watch with him. And my job, I was a air search radar operator. I stood watching combat on the ship, and we did, our watch rotation was 5 and 7. So I worked 5 hours, had 7 hours off. I worked 7 hours, had 5 hours off. Consistent rotation for almost 7 months. That's all I did. And every time I stood watch, he was right next to me. He ensured that, and he would just harass me the entire time, say inappropriate things the entire time. He was like the most awful person I've ever met in my life, and he truly enjoyed making me upset and making me feel like I had no control over my situation. And beyond that, so when I was on the ship, I came in under a command that had been there for a little while. And then I got to go through a change of command. The new captain and commander that were brought on the ship, the toxicity in that command just went way up during that change of commander. After that change of command, there was no accountability for anything. At that point, the problem was up and down the chain of command. The commander himself, the second in command of the ship, an 05, was sleeping with junior enlisted women. There was no one to report anything to. No one cared. And you were in the middle of an ocean on a ship. I mean, you don't go home at the end of the day. You live on the ship. You work with these people 24/7. There's no escaping anything. There's no other command within proximity to report to or to seek help from. So I guess long story short, I mean, I could go into so many different things. Just the cultures within my work center. I worked with 6 guys. It was me and 6 guys within my work center. We were all between E3 and E6. And just the things that I witnessed are just, I don't know. Everything from, we'd be up in combat on watch, and people would be getting messages to their email or to their phone, depending on how close we were to shore, of pictures from berthing of people doing things to their bed while they're on watch because they can't physically go down and stop them or do anything about it, right? And these involved nude images and them doing like very inappropriate things to these people's property. All kinds of, they probably would have just shrugged them off as homosexual jokes, but just really, really vulgar, inappropriate workplace behavior. Guys would be working in the cabinets on the radar system, and one of our coworkers would come up behind him and put his genitals on the back of the guy's head, right? While I'm in the space, like this is happening like while I'm there. They would hide in the P-ways at night when the lights are turned off and the red lights come on. And when people would come through the P-way, they would jump up and grab the piping in the ceiling and wrap their legs around the person's head and hump their face. These are the kind of things that happened on a regular basis. Just the climate, the culture on that ship was just like, it was really appalling. It was like, I can't even explain it sometimes. Like, it was just one of those things where I was constantly like, is this real life? Like, where am I right now? You know, why is this happening? How come no one else thinks this is inappropriate or weird? Like, I always felt like I was going crazy because I was the only one that was uncomfortable with what was happening, or I was the only one that was like, wait, what did he just say? Or what is happening, you know? And so anyway, when I was on deployment, because I was junior enlisted, I was an E4 at the time, they do rotations in the kitchen called cranking duty. So even if you're not a cook, you take an opportunity to do a rotation in the kitchen and help them with prep work and stuff like that. So I was cranking, and they had me up in the officers' mess. On the ships, they still separate officer and enlisted for meals. So I was working up in the officers' mess, which is the cafeteria, prepping meals. And when you work in the officers' mess, you have additional duties. You also clean the officers' staterooms and do their laundry for them. So I had access to this area of the ship that most enlisted people were not allowed in. Because I was doing these things, I started to notice really weird things when I was up in that area of the ship. A lot of junior enlisted women coming and going from staterooms where they were not supposed to be. There was no reason for them to be there. And just a lot of things that didn't really make sense to me. And I can tell you, the rumor mill on the ship, the scuttlebutt, I guess is what they called it in the Navy, everyone seemed to know what was happening. They knew, or they thought they knew, or there were rumors that the commander was sleeping with enlisted women. No one did anything. Nothing was done. No one tried to intervene. It was very odd. Anyway, long story short, we come back from deployment, and I was just really struggling after deployment. That was a really hard time for me to just be caught up in that for 7 months straight and like not be able to escape it. We started doing workups almost immediately after we got back to go on another deployment. And that involved working 7 12s, 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. And then we had duty on top of that. So every third day, you'd work 24-hour shift. I was burnt out. I was really not doing well. Another thing people don't realize, especially in the Navy, I was on a smaller ship. I was on a cruiser, and we didn't have a doctor assigned to our ship. We had a corpsman, but no doctor. And so even when you're in port in that situation, because I was attached to a ship, in order to go see a doctor at the medical facility on the base, I had to go through my corpsman. The corpsman had to make the appointment for me. Our captain at the time, because we had so much work to do, wasn't letting people go to medical. So it took me a really long time to even get an appointment to go see a mental health specialist. It took me a really long time. And I finally got in to see someone, and it was really bizarre. I'd never seen a mental health specialist before, but I went and talked to this dude for like 40, 50 minutes and left with like 4 prescriptions. He gave me like sleeping pills, anti-anxiety med, antidepressant, I forget what else, but it was just bizarre to me. I'm like, I don't think I'm going to take any of these. I started like looking them up and seeing, you know, the sleeping pills were super addictive and like seeing the side effects. And I was like, this is not what I want. Like, I really don't feel like there's something wrong with me. I feel like if I wasn't in this environment, I would be okay. You know, I'm reacting to the stress and like the people around me who are just so toxic. And so at that appointment, I should say, I told the psychiatrist what was happening on my ship. I told him what I knew had happened when we were deployed, that, you know, all the inappropriate behavior, but then also that the commander was sleeping with junior enlisted personnel. So I ended up setting up a follow-up appointment with him. But in the meantime, because we were in the middle of workups for another deployment, part of that is going on mini deployments to test out different systems. So after I saw him, I ended up having to go Oh, I should backtrack. So after I saw him, I ended up filing an IG complaint against the commander on my ship for, sleeping with junior enlisted women. I put in an IG complaint, and the psychologist that I had seen knew that, but and IG actually showed up to do an investigation, but they didn't remove the commander from the ship. And they didn't come out on this mini deployment with us. They just kind of paused their investigation so that we could go do this workup exercise. So what ended up happening was I ended up having to deploy with this man who's an 05, a career Navy commander, for 2 weeks on the ship, not knowing, like, does he know that I'm the one that reported him? Like, what does he know about the investigation? Like, what the fuck is going to happen to me? And it was insane. It was a very unsafe situation. But again, like, what do you do if you don't show up to go out and do this? You're UA, right? You're AWOL. They can put you in prison. They can do all sorts of things to you. So I suffered through those 2 weeks, came back, was able to go see that psychologist again, and told him, like, hey, I was just on the ship with this dude that I just reported. Like, he could lose his entire career and like his family and everything. And he was like, oh my God, I can't believe that you like had to go out with him. He's like, I thought you said IG came to the ship. And I was like, they did, but they didn't come out with us. They didn't remove him from the ship. So at that point, after kind of relaying this to the psychologist, he's like, okay, we need to do something. He's like, what? He asked me just flat out, he's like, what do you want? And by that point, I had like 3 months left on my enlistment. I was like, I just want out. I don't want to do this anymore. I do not want to be a part of this. This is not what I signed up for. I don't want to serve with these people. I don't want to be here anymore. It's like, just get me out. I was like, but only if you can do it so that I don't lose the benefits that I signed up for. Like, I've served almost 4 years. I don't want to not be able to go to college after this. Like, I didn't do anything wrong. This isn't my fault. And he was able to get me out on it with an honorable discharge under the umbrella of failure to adapt or something like that due to an anxiety disorder. And he gave me a manila envelope that was sealed with whatever paperwork he had filled out. And he said, bring this back to your ship, hand it directly to your captain. He's like, don't give it to anyone else. Make sure it goes from your hand to his. And then it should only be a couple weeks' time. I was like, okay. So I went back to the ship, and I remember I was shaking, like physically shaking. I was so nervous to walk up to the captain's stateroom with that. And even more so when I finally got up there, because he had all of the senior officers in his stateroom. They were having a meeting at that point. So I stood outside at parade rest with the manila envelope, and my division commander was like, he looked out the door and he's like, what do you want? I was like, well, I have paperwork I need to give to the captain. He's like, give it to me. I was like, I can't give it to you, sir. I was told to give it directly to the captain. And he gave me this weird look, like, what's wrong with you, And then he like motioned for me to come in, and I handed it to the captain and I left. And, not knowing like what is going to happen to me. What did I even just give him? Like, what sort of process is this going to be? And no one said anything to me. No one said anything to me for like a week and a half. I showed up one morning to report to the ship. And when I got to the quarterdeck, the watch at the quarterdeck told me, you're not reporting here anymore. You need to go report to this building on base. You're not at this command anymore. And so I walked back down from the ship and went to the building, and I processed out a few weeks later after I did TAPS and everything else. So it was really abrupt. I didn't tell anyone that I was serving with that I had filed the IG complaint, that I had reported the commander, because I was afraid. I didn't know who I could trust. I didn't know what would happen to me if people found out that I was the one that had reported it. And it's weird because I don't feel like I didn't really especially like anyone I served with. But at the same time, when you spend that much time with people and you're in such close quarters, and that's your only option for friendship, for conversation. I had relationships with these people, and I never got to say goodbye to any of them. I just showed up one day and they were like, "Hey, you're not supposed to be here anymore." It's like, okay. It's just a really weird way to end almost 4 years of my life. And that's my story. And then from there, I kind of took the route Ariana did. I did not want to stop for 2 seconds to think about anything. I got married, moved to a different state, had a kid, did my undergrad in 3 years, did my graduate degree in 1 year, had another kid. I was just running as fast as I could towards I don't even know what. And I didn't start dealing with it until like 3 years ago now. I was working in a community in Pittsburgh as a community organizer, and the stress of that work, just seeing, I think it was probably seeing the powerlessness of all of the clients and community members that I was working with, just was a constant trigger for me. To not be able to do anything to help them out of the situations they were in, to just constantly feel the same way that I did when I was in that situation in the Navy, really just drove me to a really dark place. And I finally decided, maybe I need to go talk to someone about this. And that was 3 years ago. So, it was almost, 8 years after I got out, I finally told someone all of this. Before that, I wouldn't even really tell anyone that I was a veteran. I didn't want to talk about it at all. I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to. None of it was something that was a good experience or anything. So that's kind of my story, and been in therapy for a few years now and doing better, and I'm able to talk about it now.
Well, I want to thank all three of you for, there's not enough time to thank you for all the things I want to thank you for, but for the service and for coming here and sharing your story with everybody on here. And it's heart-wrenching to hear. But I think it's important, for people to be aware of this, to acknowledge it, to start to move on it. I'd like to maybe ask Michael if you just want to share any thoughts that you have in terms of what you're hearing and sort of some of the work that you do, being at the VA and working with survivors on the other side of that.
Yeah, I just want to start by thanking Patty, Ariana, and Kelly, not only for the bravery and sharing your experiences, but also the work that you're doing for fellow survivors, and just being part of that effort. It's really inspiring to hear. I want to be mindful of time, so I'll just touch on a couple of things that I noticed that's relevant to treatment, and really want to normalize a lot of the things that these veterans shared. I think the thing that stuck out to me the most, I think it was Kelly, was this sentence of, I couldn't wrap my mind around the world, which I think was echoed by Patty and Ariana in their own sort of ways. And I just really want to normalize that experience, that any sort of trauma, particularly trauma that is interpersonal in nature, that happens in these sorts of very isolating contexts, you can't wrap your head around them. Our minds are not designed to be able to interpret things that violate sort of the social contract. And when you factor in everyone's relationship with the military, and everyone joins the military for different reasons. For some people, it's because they need a way out of their life circumstances. For some people, it's because they identify as patriots, and it's a way to sort of live out that commitment to their country. For other people, it's part of a family duty. And whatever the reason, those are just a couple of reasons. Whatever the reason is, that reason gets a lot more complicated when these things happen. And then the internalization of that shame starts to set in. Wait a minute, this was supposed to be my calling, or this was supposed something that I really enjoyed. This was something that was really, it's an important part of my identity. And now I've been forced to have this reaction to it. And I don't know what that reaction is, but it doesn't feel good. And then you heard a lot of these veterans talk about that avoidance piece. And in my work, that's probably the word I use most often. We know that maintains symptoms of PTSD, and that avoidance, it's sort of a colloquial term, but it can take so many different forms. That compulsive busyness that can take, it's a couple months or it's 15 or 20 years until someone realizes that they're being overscheduled, because in those moments before they drift off to sleep or while they're driving alone in their car, that's when these experiences pop in. And if they keep that steady rate of busyness, they don't have to face it. And that's an adaptive coping skill. So that's something I also want to highlight. That's something that, like Patty was talking about, unless you find a coping skill quickly in these isolating environments, you're not going to be able to survive. And that's very much culture, right? Suck it up, focus on the mission. And so pretending like it didn't happen or not telling anyone, I think is different for folks who aren't veterans to understand, well, how could you keep that to yourself? And really, sometimes for your own safety, it's the most adaptive decision, right? So in addition to the busyness, substance use, like Kelly spoke about, is I speak to so many veterans who that's where they end up in terms of their coping technique, right? Because they can't make contact with it. It's too painful. It's too overwhelming. And you develop these extreme thoughts like, well, if I'm at war with these people who I've entrusted with my life, these are the people who I need to rely on in a life or death situation. And this is what they've done to me. So if I can't trust them, then I can't trust anyone. And you overcorrect your thinking, right? And so at first it's super adaptive because you can't trust anyone. You shouldn't trust anyone in that situation. But then 15 years later as a civilian, it causes problems in relationships. It causes problems with your kids. It causes problems at your job. So these things that were really, really adaptive and came in for really good reason to save your life, after a certain amount of time, they don't serve you anymore. And that's where counseling sort of comes in, is when you put up these habits, put up these ways of thinking for review, because you've been putting so much pressure on that jar to keep it tight that at some point things start to seep out. And it's through no fault of any of these. It's through no fault of any of these people at all. But just some of the common themes that I've heard from these brave veterans with folks that I do the work on, that this is unfortunately all too typical of an experience. And I'm glad to hear all of you be able to say, you know, this was not my fault. This was not my fault. This was a failure of the system. This was a failure of the chain of command. And that you've gotten to the point in your recovery that that's not something that's you can get to the other side of that statement. Sometimes with effort, but you can get there. So really inspiring to hear.
Thanks, Evelyn. You had a question, I think.
Sure. Again, thank you to all of you for joining us today. I've had the opportunity to speak with them and hear their stories before, and I will tell you that didn't matter, because again, when I heard them today, it was like hearing them for the first time. It just takes you away to hear the kinds of experiences that they had while trying to serve their country. And so with that in mind, as well as with what the foundation is here to do, but my question around, each of you spoke about when you got back, how difficult it was to think about that experience, or to think about telling anyone about that experience. Well, you 5 years or 4 years or 10 years before you could get to a point of saying something, that between that time of it happening and between the time of you coming to a place where you could speak about it, you saw a physician, you got some medical attention for something, whether it was a cold or, a sprain or a headache or what have you. What was it, or what do you think your experience might have been like if you had been seen by someone who screened for these kinds of issues? And then what would it be like, or what would you need from that provider to make you feel, or to have you feel trust, ease, comfort, and even alluding to the type of experience that you had? Because again, from my perspective, as a physician myself, but also as someone who's looking to train and to educate and to have the experience that you all have had be better than it is, or be better than it was, I want to hear from you. What would have made that experience with that physician or that provider easier for you, more tolerable for you, to be able to come to talk about that experience much sooner, so that you wouldn't have, thrown away or diminished or squashed, if you will, so many years of your life after having had that experience in the first place?
I'll say two things, Evelyn, to that. The first is, I think for me, it would have even known what MST is, right? So I didn't even have a concept or an understanding that what I experienced was considered military sexual trauma. So I didn't even have that as a connection point until 2 years ago, right? Like until I learned of what a vet center was. Like I didn't even know what a vet center was and what they were able to provide to someone like me. So I think knowing what MST is and how much it covers, right? It's not just for those that were physically, assaulted, but also everything from sexual harassment, like that depth, right? Because within the military, that sexual harassment is a culture. And I can also honestly say that I didn't even know that what I experienced was harassment. I just thought it was like how it is. And so had I seen a doctor that said, I see here that you're a veteran of the United States military. Here's resources, right, for women who, when they come out, if they want to talk to someone, this is what a vet center is. This is the services that they provide. And, experiences of military sexual trauma are, here's that list, right? So I think there was a really big education that I didn't have, that I'd gone to VAs, I had been there, I went and I was like, okay, I'm not physically injured. I'm a young person. I can get my healthcare through my job. So I'm not going to utilize the VA for my healthcare. So I think those are all the things. And it wasn't until I started to get connected to a community of other veterans that either utilize the vet centers or were like outreach people for the vet centers that I understood what it was and started to get a little more education around what I had experienced actually qualifies as this. And so this is a resource for me.
Okay. Thank you.
I can say with my
Anyone else?
my MST, can you hear me? Okay, with my MST not having been a physical assault, I certainly did not realize that it qualified as MST. I didn't even know what MST was, but I didn't think there was any reason for me to talk about what had happened to me. I mean, I knew at the time that I didn't like it. I knew that it didn't feel good. It made me feel unsafe. It made me feel constantly anxious, unsettled. But, like Ariana said, I just thought that's the way it was. That was the military, right? The other thing I think is important to highlight, Women, at least during my service, my experience, women did not talk to one another about being harassed. They didn't talk to one another about being assaulted. They one of our friends that Ariana and I talked to on our podcast, she called it whisper networks. It's the kind of thing everyone knows is happening. People are aware it's going on, but it's not being talked about. The women weren't forming a support group amongst one another to that wasn't happening. And so I think for me, I honestly don't think that there was anything a healthcare provider could have said to me at any point that would have helped. For me, I very much think that I needed to go through a process of meeting people, of learning information, of hearing other people's experiences to be able to finally realize not only that what happened to me was wrong, should not have happened, but that it had impacted me in the way that it did. I spent a long time feeling a great deal of shame that I didn't finish my enlistment. I think that was one of the big reasons that I never told anyone I served, because I didn't want to talk about it. I wasn't able to accomplish what I had set out to do, and I felt like a failure. I felt like I just felt like a failure. I hated myself for a very long time. And I think that's the other reason I kind of use the coping mechanism of just staying busy. I think I was trying to prove to myself that I wasn't a failure. I'm not a failure. I'm going to get my undergraduate degree in 3 years, right? I'm going to get my grad degree in a year. I'm going to go and build this career for myself, and just constantly chasing the next thing to prove to myself, like, I can do something. I'm not going to fail again. And so, to be honest with you, I don't think that, I think there was a series of steps that I needed to encounter, or learning experiences that I needed to encounter to get to a place where I finally stopped denying that not only is this affecting my life in a huge way, but it's not my fault. And I'm not a failure. The shame's not mine to bear. And it's still hard. I still have days where I don't fully believe that. And I have to remind myself and get back to a place where I'm like, no, it is not me. And I think the biggest thing that helped me, to be honest with you, was hearing other women's talk about their experiences and finally breaking those whisper networks and forming supportive communities.
Quick question, do you all, either of you, that had been said about this, and not necessarily specific to MST, but about these kinds of issues in TAPS, or as you were exiting, getting some kind of exit physical or exit, conversation or what have you, do you think that would have been of any value to you at all?
Possibly. Possibly.
All right, it was
Okay.
so long ago, Evelyn. I don't know. I don't remember anything from TAPS. I don't know.
Well, I can
Can I
assure you
jump
during
in
that
too?
time, they definitely didn't talk about it. So, but yeah, I just wondered, just thinking through things that might be of help to those coming through now. Thank you,
Right.
guys.
Honestly,
Can I jump in for a second?
Oh, yep, go ahead.
No, I don't want to interrupt. I wanted to piggyback off what you said, Patty. There was, once I discharged from the military, I told what happened and I left. There is nothing that anybody could have said that would have gotten me to talk. There's nothing. I was a vault, and it took me till 2011 to admit I was a veteran. To nothing. I mean, and I was in and out of jail. It was, do you know what I mean? And it wasn't until I ended up in veterans court and being surrounded by other veterans and trust was built with a team of people that I didn't like at all at first, that and And I know that I was probably one of their tougher cases in Veterans Court, but their support, and I built a level of trust with them. When I finally said something, I felt safe enough to say it. Like Patty said it real quick, there's nothing anybody could say to get me to talk. This was a piece of me, like it was so broken, and I hit it down like so low because if it even swelled up a little bit, um, it's like physical pain. I was so upset about it. I could feel it physically, and it would make me sick. And like I said, I went down a really dark road for a really long time. But it, even though that's my story, that doesn't mean we shouldn't ask. Doctors should be asking these things. You know. Okay, thank you.
No, thank you. Thank
Evelyn,
you.
I was going to say to your point about asking if anything could be done before you discharge, it kind of made me think like, I think that maybe a pivotal moment during my experience where something might have been helpful was when I was seeing the psychologist that I was seeing on base. If he had relayed to me in some way while it was happening, that this is not your fault, if he had thought to like recognize that I might feel shame around my experience, or that I might feel like I had that I internalized it in some way as being my fault, and not the fault of the perpetrators, that might have been a key moment. I mean, I'm not sure because it didn't happen, but maybe.
Okay, thank you.
Because it never even occurred to me in my own mind at that time that it wasn't my fault, and that it wasn't something I could control, right?
Right. Michael, were you going to say something about a moment ago?
Oh, I was just going to say that despite these folks, you know, as they said, they felt they wouldn't feel comfortable, or it wouldn't even been on their radar. They didn't have the education, whatever the answer. I think it's still important on the VA side, speaking for the VA, is just to plant the seed, to let people know that, hey, this is something we're going to be asking about. And who knows what would have happened if that seed was planted, if that definition of MST was sort of operationalized, and if people knew that, hey, you know, if you do endorse this, all of your healthcare is paid for, all of your physical, all of your medical, if you develop a substance use problem associated with this. And I don't think it would have changed any of these stories, but I think from a system-wide perspective, we need to do certainly better on the active duty side of things, in terms of out processing folks who, you know, are hit with a couple of self-report surveys and sent on their way. From the veterans I speak to. So even if people aren't willing to talk or don't even have the awareness, I still think it's important to ask. And what I'm hearing is, and ask again, contact people a year out, 2 years out, 5 years out, could save them a lot of time and struggle.
Yeah. I'm going to come to somebody with a question in just a moment, but yeah, just to sort of echo that, I think, you know, yeah, what you hear is how there's so many different levels at which this is an issue, you know, at the individual level, all the way up through the systems level. And there has to be change on all those fronts, you know, but yeah, I think ask again, you know, and that has to start early, and it has to happen often. Yeah, thanks. Nicole, you mentioned that you had a question, so let me give you a chance to go ahead.
Yeah. So Keith had posted a flyer for a group I run for Mason students called Surviving to Thriving, that includes students and veterans who've experienced military sexual trauma. So just would encourage, if you know of anybody that needs those resources, it's free. Please invite them to use them. I was just blown away today by all three of your stories. And something I'm sitting with and struggling with this was something that both Dr. Levy and Dr. Renshaw kind of alluded to, which is this dichotomy between these systems that have just totally failed females, and yet then it's on a female to, well, how can we fix the system? How can we report? How can I get therapy? And it just feels so much like putting a Band-Aid on a gaping wound, and it just feels so, yeah, it's just hard for me just listening to that talk to hold those two together, like everything we're trying to do to patch it together after the fact just feels so inadequate. And I'm just wondering for you three, like how you struggle with that, like the fact that, you know, the system failed you and but you are willingly taking on the burden of fixing it, even though it doesn't have to be your responsibility. And how do you square that?
It's funny, Nicole, that you asked that question, because I think that's nature of being a veteran, right? We go to fix. We go into hard situations, difficult situations, and say, I'm going to make that better. I'm going to do that work. And you know, it's that same old adage too with women in general. You want something done, you ask a mom to do it because they're going to be able to figure that out, right? Like they'll make the time to make it happen. And I think because we are survivors, because we know how hard it has been our entire lives to get to where we are today, 20 years out, 10 years out, all we want is to make sure that those young women, the Vanessa Guillens of the world, are taken care of. They're not being taken care of today. They don't have the resources in place. We're starting to see some progress and some movement. And I think, I know for at least for me, it's like whatever I can continue to do to make sure that other women who are serving today are not going to have the same experience 20 years down the road and go through the same things that I went through, then I'm in it. I don't care if I don't make I think Patty and I don't make any money doing this, right? Like we do this for free. We put forth our energy and effort each and every day because we know how important it is. I don't have to square it. I don't have to say, the military, you fucked me over. Well, you did. But I am now using you. I used your GI Bill. I used your VA home loan. I'm using the VA healthcare. I'm going to make sure that every other woman that comes behind me is taken care of. And so I think that that's just who we are, right? And so I'd love to see it get fixed, right? I'd love to see it change for the better. And so in an effort to do that, I do things like this. I advocate with the VA. I talk to them, like, we want to change the motto to include women. Like, what a great thing that would be, just to visually walk into the VA and know that you're included. So I think that may not answer your question entirely, but at least from my perspective, that's how I square it. I square it knowing that I'm going to make this better, whether or not the Department of Defense or the VA or anybody else is behind me in doing that.
I kind of feel a responsibility to help other women veterans. I don't know if that's just a continuation of kind of how we're socialized in the military to look out for one another, but I feel like I have been able to navigate the resources somewhat. I've been able to find help. And I kind of feel like with that, my responsibility is to make other people aware that those resources are available and help them to navigate them. I will say I had a really cool opportunity this last year, and I say cool, maybe not in the traditional sense of the word, but one of the women veterans that I was working with, she actually was still in the Guard, and she was going through a similar experience that I went through, where she was being asked to consistently be in a very unsafe situation in the same chain of command that she had experienced her assault in. And I was able to help provide her a perspective that you're not able to see for yourself in those situations because you're so scared and you feel so powerless. Where I was able to tell her, like, no, you're not going back to that base. I don't care what they say. I am going to stand behind you. And these other women veterans that are a part of our group, we're going to stand behind you. And we have leaders within the community who are aware of your story, who are going to stand behind you. And we're all going to stand behind you when you tell your command that you are not going to go back to that unsafe situation, because it is against your physical safety for you to be there. And that is a good enough reason in and of itself. And if your command does not take their responsibility as leaders serious enough to make that acknowledgement, then they can try and do whatever they want to do. But you have the backing of these people who are aware of what actually happened. the situation you're in. And she did it. She told them, I'm not coming back to base. And they continuously told her, you need to report back to base. She said, no, I am not coming back to base. And we were able to get enough people involved at the state level where she never had to go back. And that to me was really just a really great experience to be a part of. It kind of brought a little bit of closure, I guess, maybe to my experience. And I wish I had had someone tell me that when I was in that situation. Like, you don't have to go out on that ship with this man who could do whatever he wants to you while you're on that ship. You're a huge target right now if he knows anything about the fact that you were involved in reporting him, right? And so, I don't know, experiences like that and just the feeling of being a part of this new community that we've created of women veteran survivors and survivors in general. We have men that participate too. And it's kind of the community I thought I was getting into when I joined the military. It's like the family the military never was. And we're all very supportive of one another, so.
Thank you. I'm not seeing further chats, and I know that although we have it booked out, I know a few people already had to drop out, when we hit on 2 o'clock. So I want to be mindful of the time. I have a couple closing thoughts if people will bear with me. And first of all, I just want to note first of all, the importance of not, leaving this to the women, the survivors, to be the sole folks to be trying to push forward on addressing this, right? It makes me think of the anti-racism work, going on all around us. It's the people with privilege and power, right? Who have the most capacity to make change, and it's on us to do that, right? And so I think that those with the privilege within the system, have to be working on this. That said, the power of community can't be overstated, and the power of being able to talk with someone who you feel like can understand what you've been through is just tremendous, right? And so when you talk about, I'm not sure if a doctor asking me would have done it, or if a psychologist would have done it. We want all those things to happen, but also the things that the three of you are doing in your everyday lives here today is precisely that. And I can't tell you how meaningful that is and how grateful I am to the three of you for the work you do every day and for having taken the time to join us. If we had somebody, on the call, a single person, who sort of takes this and, and kicks them a step forward, I mean, that's a wonderful thing. It's a terrible thing that it's needed, but it's a wonderful thing if it happens. And so, I really, just from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank you for your openness, your perseverance, your courage, and for being with us today. We're all better for it. I do want, for those of you, in the audience, I do want to just note, we did repost that PDF that sort of pulled together all the resources. There are resources that Dr. Levy provided, that Patty and Ariana provided, that link into the Me Too MST, other sort of resources. In addition, sort of just a fact sheet, with some information for you, as well as a couple of flyers for treatment opportunities, one that's specific to Mason students, but the one that's open to female veterans as well that are coming up. So please, if you're interested in that, we'll leave the meeting open even after we shut down for that. But I also just a quick note that in this series of sort of the veterans' lived experience, we are seeking to try to bring a series coming up that'll focus on suicide and suicidality. So we'll be sharing more information on that in the coming days. But again, just deep thanks to Dr. Levy, to our three veterans who joined us, Patty, Ariana, and Kelly. Thank you so much, and to Dr. Lewis and Tyrone Sims, who I see on here too, for your partnership through the Veterans Health and Wellness Foundation. Thank you all very much. I want to wish everybody the best. And if anybody has any other parting thoughts, please, feel free to jump in now. Evelyn?
No, I just, again, once again, wanted to thank our guests, Patty and, excuse me, Kelly and Ariana. As you heard me say before, I've talked to them a number of times and heard their stories, and it's just a haunting experience every time you hear them again. So thank you guys very much for being willing to do that, because it will help me help others, and join you as we try to get this under control here. So thanks again.
Thanks for having us.
Welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, everybody. Thank you, and have a good day. Stay safe, and get in line for the